Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Sunday, November 14th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Michigan State game is in 6 days, the game against Michigan in 13 days. We've talked before about Ohio State's final 6 games of the season heading to a potential national championship being basically the equivalent of an NCAA tournament run. If that's true, the Buckeyes won their first round game yesterday with a pretty big run in the first half. Ohio State was up 35-7 in the second quarter, 45-17 at halftime in a 59-31 win over number 19 Purdue. As you'd expect from a game with that final score, there were plenty of highlights for the Buckeyes, but a few things to be a little bit concerned about as well. My guest today is Buckeye Scoop's Kevin Noon. Kevin, I know there's plenty you can nitpick, but I kind of came away from that game thinking it's more likely that they potentially win a playoff semifinal game or even the national championship than I did even a couple of days ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's did what they needed to do on offense. Let's move the mic a little closer. They did what they needed to do on offense. They were able to they executed in the red zone. We saw the running game. I mean, was it completely fixed? No, but we saw 220 and 220. I mean, they go for 361 passing yards, 263 rushing yards. So, I mean, they did a lot of things that they needed to do. Are there concerns? Yes, there are going to be concerns when you see Purdue throw for 390, go for 481, put up 31 points, and it could have been more, to be honest, in terms of things. But this is a team, though, that seems to it's gotten past some of the issues that maybe plagued it against Nebraska, some of the issues that maybe plagued it against Penn State. Some issues that had always been a little underlying are still there, but they still have time to figure that out as they have two more games left in the Big Ten regular season. And if they win both of those, they know that they control their own destiny. They're going to punch their ticket to Indianapolis. They have another game to figure that out. Then they have a couple weeks until a potential semifinals game.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, there was plenty to be a little concerned about on the defensive side of the ball. We'll get there. I always like to start with the good news, get everyone in a good mood. So let's talk about the offense. Buckeyes ran the ball for 8.5 yards per play, scored 4 touchdowns and 5 red zone trips. Remember last week, couple weeks when they couldn't score in the red zone, not a problem on Saturday. That does exclude an end of game kneel down, but they certainly looked like they were about to punch it in there as well. It to me looked more like the offensive line play and ground game that we saw when they really had things rolling earlier in the season. Did you kind of get that vibe as well? It's like, okay, maybe they've, the teams that have been doing some specific things that I've talked to Ross Fulton about to stop that ground game, Ohio State maybe has come up with a counterpunch to get back to getting things really rolling again.
Yeah, I mean, they had a couple of big hits. 108 yards came on 2 carries, including a 51-yarder by Garrett Wilson. But it seemed like it was a team that was firing off the line a little bit better. They were doing a better job of getting into that second level, opening up some holes. I mean, there were a good number of little chunk plays, 4, 5, 6 yard runs. You see Mayan Williams go out there. He ends up putting up 117 in relief of Trevion Henderson. I think that it was a much more typical Ohio State running game of what we were accustomed of seeing. Because let's not forget, Ohio State's always going to have running in its DNA. I mean, I don't care how great the passers are. I don't care that we're seeing, maybe a once in a lifetime haul of receivers right now with Olave and Wilson and Jackson Smith and Jigba. They need to be able to run the ball, and we saw a lot of it. Again, it's not fixed by any stretch of the imagination to the point of being like, well, they can just go out there and roll it out there and say we're good to go. But they were able to do a lot more with the running game and with getting 3 touchdowns on the ground. That's very impressive too.
You mentioned that haul of receivers, and last week they had Jackson Smith and Jigba, who just went out and set a school record for most receptions in a game and very nearly broke the most receiving yards in a game record as well. And then this weekend, Garrett Wilson was back after missing last week, and all he did was 177 total yards and 4 touchdowns. First player in Ohio State history to have 3 receiving touchdowns and a running touchdown in the same game. And as I was watching it, I was thinking, you wouldn't think we could take Garrett Wilson for granted at this point, but after last weekend and seeing what the offense looked like then and what the offense looked like this weekend with Garrett Wilson out there making big plays, maybe that was a bigger deal than we might have thought a week ago to not have Garrett Wilson against Nebraska.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Garrett Wilson means so much to the offense, and that's not taking anything away from Chris Olave, and that's not taking anything away from Jackson Smith and Jigba. As JSN, as you said, had just a record-setting kind of game. He almost broke another record in that game with a number of receptions and receiving yards and everything he had there. But Garrett Wilson is just a different type of receiver, and he just makes makes so many things possible for them. And not having him out there, because what happens is JSN's your slot guy. I mean, he was really kind of a jack of all trades in that game, and then you have Chris Olave. But if you can really kind of clamp down on Chris Olave, and then you're like, well, we'll give whatever we need to underneath to JSN. They don't have the multiple threats, and it's really having the multiple threats that makes them that much more dangerous.
And yeah, having those three receivers together completely changes the game. Here's their stats. Garrett Wilson, 10 catches, 126 yards, 3 touchdowns. Jackson Smith and Jigba, 9 catches, 139 yards, 1 touchdown. Chris Olave, 9 catches, 85 yards, 1 touchdown. And he also had one that got called back that was pretty ticky-tack holding penalty on Jeremy Ruckert that called back a long touchdown pass to Chris Olave. But, one of the things that makes those three guys good is not just that they're all really good players. And we had a conversation on the post-game Buckeye Weekly show about which one of them was the best receiver. And it was like we ended up with, well, I guess in third place is the guy who might set like all of the school receiving records in like this year, the career school receiving records. I guess he has to be in third place because the other two are just so incredible. But what those three guys together do is they make it impossible because no one has three receivers like this, but no one has three corners like this either. And that means one of those guys is going to be a matchup nightmare for whoever they play, no matter who the other teams have in their defensive backfields coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, everybody talks about with Georgia this and Georgia that and what they're going to be able to do. Georgia can do a lot of things well. I mean, that defense is scary good, but they haven't gone against and we're talking about a hypothetical matchup here, but they haven't gone against an offense like Ohio State that has, 3 surefire NFL type of receivers out there. And that's, that puts a lot of stress on a defense. That puts a lot of pressure on a defense. I mean, and yeah, there are things that you can do to try and minimize that to a point, but let's be real. I mean, everybody wants to sit there and say the SEC is this and the SEC is that. Nobody has the type of offense that Ohio State does in the SEC this year. And that, I had the opportunity to watch Ole Miss play, and Ole Miss has a lot of good things going for it, but Ole Miss doesn't have 3 receivers like Ohio State. I mean, Ole Miss has a dynamic run-pass type of quarterback in Matt Corral.
Yeah, and they have. You go through Auburn or Alabama. Everyone holds up Alabama as the gold standard of teams outside of Georgia. Alabama's game-changing wide receiver, who's by far the best player on their offense in terms of wide receivers, is the guy who left Ohio State because he wasn't sure he'd be a starter at Ohio State. Like that's Alabama's great, incredible game-changing receiver. Quite possibly might be literally the 4th receiver on this Ohio State team. That's what that unit looks like. And that's why you just have this incredible matchup issue. So, okay, that's it for the good news. Now let's talk about the defense. It certainly got Ohio State fans very concerned. Our chat on our post-game Buckeye Weekly Instant Reaction Live episode was filled with people who have major questions about the defense and specific players on the defense and scheme concerns about the defense and much, much more. Purdue threw for 390 yards, 4 touchdowns. I think maybe the bigger concern is here's their drives. The last 3 quarters of the game, their drives were 10 plays, 80 yards, 10 plays, 61 yards, 7 plays, 75 yards, 10 plays, 87 yards, 13 plays, 51 yards. I'm not leaving a bunch of stuff out. They had one kneel down at the end of the half. That was the only exception that I left out there. So the defense just really struggled to get off the field. But I think it's also fair to wonder, it was 35-7, not very far into that stretch of drives. So how vanilla were the coaches keeping the defense? Because it was never really close. I mean, how big of a concern is that to you? Is that how much of that do you chalk up to, oh no, there's major problems on the pass defense versus the game was 35-7 and they were just trying to not give up big plays and just keep everything in front of them because all they really cared about was winning?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something to be said about the fact that, hey, you're up 35-7. Let's just not, let's not do a lot here. Let's not put ourselves in harm's way. But then again, you get so few opportunities to play games. Do you really want to throw anything away with that type of situation? Two things jump out for me: Ohio State's lack of pass rush. I understand that with what Purdue was throwing at them, you needed to have a lot of guys out there in coverage. Ohio State sent three, sent four. They just weren't getting home. But I think the other thing that really jumps out to me is Purdue had 28 first downs and was 5 of 10 on third down. So Ohio State obviously was not doing a good job of getting Purdue off schedule, or at least creating a lot of third downs. Because, I mean, if they were only 5 of 10, that meant that they were getting first downs on first or second down for large stretches of the game, and that's the problem. And I think that's something there too, because you would sit there and think, okay, well, if Ohio State was getting to the quarterback either on first or second down, that would get them off schedule, and then you'd have more of those opportunities. So it all kind of works together when you look at it. But I think that there were a lot of issues on multiple levels, and it goes anywhere from any of the three levels on the defensive side to maybe some of the play calling to maybe some things that we're just not aware of in terms of what their mindset was of how they wanted to call this.
One thing that we talked about a lot going into the game was Purdue wide receiver David Bell, the potential matchup with Denzel Burke. Burke was not on him every snap of the game, but he was on him a decent chunk of the game. Bell finished 11 catches for 103 yards. However, that was on 18 targets. So you want to do the math, 18 targets for 103 yards. That works out to 5.7 yards per catch, which is basically the equivalent of the 119th best pass offense this season. That means that when Purdue threw the ball to David Bell, who is their best wide receiver, who is a very likely first-round wide receiver, their passing offense was the functional equivalent of something between like Indiana and Rutgers in terms of the Big Ten. And, I think I came away from that game thinking that Denzel Burke at least could be a legitimate threat to lock down a lot of the top receivers the Buckeyes might face moving forward, including, Jamison Williams is a very different kind of challenge than David Bell, but I don't know that I look at Jamison Williams or anyone else and think, the one wide receiver might have the big blow up 200-yard game on this Ohio State defense, because for whatever issues they have, the corner play is pretty impressive right now.
Yeah, you sit there and you look at the national landscape, and with Oklahoma losing, they're not going to. I mean, Oklahoma is probably done for in terms of a potential postseason run that would put them in line with Ohio State. So, you look at Alabama and Jamison Williams. Georgia certainly has some guys, but I wouldn't necessarily say that that's just a high-powered offense. I think it's a consistent offense, but it's much more well-balanced with some of the running backs that are there. I've certainly watched Cincinnati. I'm not convinced Cincinnati, even if it goes undefeated, it's getting in. You can keep going through this. Maybe a rematch against Oregon. What happens in that situation? But Denzel Burke, he certainly has proven himself, and I think we've seen even a little bit of a step forward from what he was able to do against Jahan Dotson. And the Jahan Dotson matchup was very real, and it was entertaining to watch. And once I get the opportunity to really go back and watch this, and hopefully the ABC telecast does a good job with some up high shots, so I can kind of see a little bit more of what's going on there. But I expect to come away very complimentary of Denzel Burke. I thought he did very well.
And, I think we learned a lot probably about the Ohio State pass defense for good or for ill this week against Purdue. Next week, I think we might learn a lot about the Ohio State rush defense, because no one has run the ball on them, but they have not faced a Kenneth Walker yet. And they're going to face a Kenneth Walker next weekend in literally Kenneth Walker. And the week after that, you've got potentially a pretty good Michigan run offense as well with Hassan Haskins and Blake Corum, if Blake Corum is back and healthy at that point. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a question right now. He did not play against Penn State, but you got another couple of weeks, so he's going to be trying to get back for the Ohio State game.
He'll want to get back, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I think we're going to learn more about the rush defense and just, how much can they really lean on that? Because Michigan State is going to be maybe more of a Georgia-ish offense than anyone that Ohio State has faced for the most part this year. So that'll be, I think, an interesting test. But, coming off that Purdue game, did that game change your assessment of Ohio State's chances of, A, winning the Big Ten, B, making the college football playoff, which would presumably mean not only winning the Big Ten, but also winning out to win the Big Ten, or C, winning the national championship? Did it really move the needle on any of those for you, or was that just kind of like a check the box and move on kind of game?
I felt pretty good about Ohio State winning the Big Ten all along. I mean, even when we were in the darkest hour of Buckeye Nation after the Oregon loss, and where is this team at, and even going out beyond that to like the Tulsa game. But I do think that you do. Ohio State wasn't going to get it done with the offensive effort that we saw the previous 2 weeks. And I understand that the competition stepped up, but guess what? If you're getting into the postseason, the competition is going to step up. So you need to be able to prove that you're doing this. Was Purdue truly the number 19 team in the nation? It's not for me to judge. That's what the College Football Playoff Committee said. So Ohio State will say thank you very much, and we'll take that as a ranked win. But I think it bodes well. But I think you do have to have a little reservations about some of the stuff you saw defensively as well. But we'll know more after the next 8 quarters of football between Michigan State and Michigan.
One thing that does, I think, work in Ohio State's favor, and I think we may have touched on this, just at least mentioned it very briefly earlier, was Oklahoma did lose. They lost to Baylor, so now Ohio State is very much in a win and you're in position.
Absolutely.
If they win out, they're going to be in the college football playoff. There's really no scenario at this point where they get left out. It's possible maybe they could lose to some, it's possible that if Michigan lost another game, maybe you could sneak in with a loss to Michigan or something like that. But, it's probably winning you're in, lose, and you are probably out right now is probably the most likely scenario.
Yeah, you're probably playing for the Rose Bowl at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. Which, that's not the worst thing in the world either. But yeah, it feels like Ohio State is through their first round matchup. It really probably is the NCAA tournament right now that they did not get the help they probably were hoping for from Penn State beating Michigan. That would have maybe given them kind of a backdoor to get into the Big Ten championship game, even with a loss in Ann Arbor. That didn't happen. It probably now is, survive and advance at this point. Just win each of these games. 5 more in your national champions, 3 more in your Big Ten champions, and go from there. So the first of those remaining 5 will be this weekend against Michigan State. We'll have all sorts of coverage this week at BuckeyeScoop.com. We have, if you want to hear a lot more about the Purdue game, and I mean a lot more about the Purdue game, check out the instant reaction post-game episode of Buckeye Weekly. Tony Gerdeman, Kevin, and I all spent about an hour and 45 minutes with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of you guys online on YouTube, answering questions, breaking down the game, sharing our thoughts on the game, the playoff implications, Jell-O, all sorts of stuff. Those are always kind of wide-ranging shows, we'll call them. So we had a real fun conversation after the game, and you can find that on the Buckeye Weekly feed or on our YouTube channel, which is at youtube.com/BuckeyeScoop. And if you are watching this on YouTube, hit that bell, subscribe to that channel, because we will have a ton of content this week, and we will have our usual pregame and postgame shows for Saturday against Michigan State. So best way to get notified and make sure you're a part of those shows and don't miss a thing is to subscribe to that YouTube channel, youtube.com/BuckeyeScoop. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.